Are you ready to go beyond pen test reporting? Elevate your offensive security and measure risk reduction by streamlining pen test planning, report creation, and findings delivery. Request and attend a one-on-one personalized demo today at securityweekly.com/PlexTrack, and PlexTrack will send you a Starbucks $10, euro, or pounds gift card totally free just for your time. That's securityweekly.com/PlexTrack.
Business Security Weekly is live streamed and recorded on Mondays at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Each week, we address the challenges facing CISOs through our guest interviews, including former and active CISOs. Our news segment is focused on leadership and communication to better help security leaders translate and communicate security risks into business risks. Jason Albuquerque, Ben Carr, Tyler Robinson, and others add their expertise to the conversation. I'm Matt Alderman, and I hope you search for Business Security Weekly in your favorite podcast catcher and subscribe to download our latest content.
Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. Larry, did you know that cyber threats are evolving?
What?
Yeah, is your organization keeping up?
Yeah, of course.
Maybe? You think? Well,
Maybe.
The 2023 Cybersecurity Year in Review is here. You can uncover the latest challenges and strategic responses in CRA's 2023 Cybersecurity Year in Review, sponsored by the RSA Conference. From the impact of generative AI to the risks of ransomware to navigating new SEC rulings, get ahead for 2024 with your free copy that you can download at securityweekly.com/Year in Review 2023.
Hey, if it's free, it's for me.
That's right. All righty. Mr. Jeff Mann is here with us. We're trying to get Mandy back. She had some internet issues. Josh had to do something or other. Josh, blah, blah, blah.
something.
Josh.
Give kids a bath. Something.
Where would we like to start?
Oh, man.
Do we want to knock out the obvious one or save it to
What's
later?
the obvious one? Tell me the obvious. Microsoft. Oh, Microsoft got breached?
Yep.
And this kind of goes with the NAS.API credential stuffing list thing as well, given that the Microsoft one was credential stuffing.
Yep.
I find
but so much more than that.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jeff.
We could probably spend a considerable amount of time. Well, I read the article that Paul posted. I forget which article number it is, but I have long thought that breaches typically the root cause can be pointed back to process failure, and it sounds like the Microsoft thing is going to be in that category ultimately. It's not just that it was password stuffing; it's a combination of things.
I like it. Steve Bellevin.
Steve Bellevin, yeah, that was the thing.
We interviewed him on the show, I believe. What is because it was it catching the what? No, it wasn't catching the. What was the firewalls and internet security catching?
Cheswick and Bellevin.
Cheswick. It was firewalls and internet security, right?
Hold on.
No. Hold up the book, Jeff. Yeah, firewalls and internet security, repelling the wily hacker. We've interviewed both Ches and Steve Bellevin in the past, and I think even re-released the remastered cuts.
Nice.
Of both of those interviews, I'll have to go back and check. I don't know if we did the Steve Bellevin one, but we should.
Remember, I missed the Steve Bellevin interview. I was getting on a plane watching it, and I was kicking myself because this is actually an autographed copy of the book.
Nice. Now, Steve has been pretty vocal on social media. It's not the first quote I've seen from him. That's amazing, Jeff. I've seen from him. What Steve is recounting is that
you just saw my hacker handle if you were paying attention.
There you go. Password spraying, but he said access to email accounts belonging to senior leadership, cybersecurity and legal. And this has been my experience, and I've talked about this on the show in the past, and it's interesting how it relates to our compliance, where compliance says you must or you should have multi-factor authentication enabled for every account in your organization. And the rub there is
there is no compliance that says that, Paul.
There isn't?
I don't think
someone
so.
can correct us if we're wrong. I mean, I think it should, right?
I mean, I think the should word comes into play.
Yeah. But it's always my recommendation where I'm like, look, if you don't have a second factor enabled for authentication on all of your, let's just say Microsoft, 365 accounts or whatever, then you're going to lose, right?
Right.
And it's often the senior leadership that the inconvenience is the friction point, and they're like, "Well, not for me. You don't need it for me."
Well, senior leadership or admins or devs that feel that they're they're above the rules, or
right.
that they get it and they're responsible and they can work around it. I mean, because it sounded like this attack focused on a server that was not necessarily production, kind of neglected, kind of a one-off, maybe a legacy, forgotten system, which again points to a process failure. Why was it out there? Why was it hanging out there where it was internet accessible? Why didn't it have MFA enabled, which it should have? And if I recall, it wasn't, they were directly, they got onto that, and from there they were able to start spraying the executive credentials, and lo and behold found weak passwords. So it's a cascade of things that you would think a large company that's been in this business a long time would know better, and have we spent the last segment talking about GRC automation tools to checking for things that fall out of compliance. These are the types of things that you want to check for falling out of compliance.
But we all know that even if you have some kind of automation and checking, there's oftentimes gaps in any of those systems, right?
Absolutely.
And then I think to your point, Jeff, of Microsoft being a large company, that both helps and hurts, right? It helps because, yes, they have a lot of resources at their disposal, conceivably, especially in Microsoft's case, where if you're defending the Windows operating system, but you're also the creator of said operating system, conceivably that should put you at a significant advantage, right, for what you're doing. But again, I think size works against Microsoft, and also longevity too, right? They've got both problems. Microsoft was conceivably one of the first software companies, now one of the oldest software companies, and now also the largest software company, and that just has all kinds of your attack surface just by nature is much greater.
Yeah, but because of all those things, they're also a more lucrative target. And they probably rely on and disclaimer, I'm not particularly bashing Microsoft here. They just happen to be the big company du jour that's getting bit by something. But because they're large, they're a more attractive target, but also because they're large and presumably do a lot more things, and they probably do. They probably rely on the bad guys thinking, oh, why should I bother going after these guys? They've probably got all sorts of protections. I'll get caught. Let me go on and find some, easier, more lucrative target. But when you can do it, boy, this is really bad, and it's really, and it's it's bad when the client says no, when the company says no comment.
But I think I don't think it's. I think some attackers may be like, yeah, I'm not going to bother with the bigger targets because I potentially could get caught because they have more resources at their disposal to detect attacks, right? I also think there's some attackers that are like, yeah, they don't care about that necessarily, and that works its way into different facets. It particularly come into mind. And I don't fault Microsoft for, I fault companies when it's like gross negligence, or they're in denial and they shouldn't be, right? Or how they're handling the disclosure is they're poo-pooing on the vulnerability reporters or the researchers, right? Then I will typically have criticisms of that particular, and I shouldn't say criticisms of the company. I will have criticisms for how that particular incident was handled, right? In my book, you got to have like a track record of doing that before I start poo-pooing the company. Right. And then I get a sense of your overall philosophy when it comes to security and how you conduct business. is significantly flawed. And like basically, I feel like you're hiding stuff or engaging in practices that I just flat out don't agree with. Right. So I'll go to HP and I'll go to John Deere with specific examples where facts and incidents over time have like led me to this conclusion. Now, I hope that those companies in particular, that I'm not going to be picking on them, and they're going to turn things around and listen to what we have to say and want to do more of the right things rather than the let's sweep it under the rug, let's not pay attention to it, let's attack people who are reporting vulnerabilities and security researchers to defend their position, which in a lot of cases is pretty poor. And I mean, HP and John Deere are kind of now in this same kind of bucket that we'll transition to next.
HP was bad at that, and then they got better. And now there's some way off the deep end HP shit.
But it's a very astute.
Are we talking
point.
HP or HPE, first of all?
HP printers. Talking HP printers is a great distinction, Jeff. Yeah.
Hey, it's
So
Lee.
it's HP. It's HPE
Lee.
Inc.
Lee Neely has
not
joined us
HPE.
at a good time. We're about to do some ranting, Lee.
Oh, I'm good. I'm up with some ranting after the day I've had. I'll tell you.
Now, I want to go back to Microsoft for a moment. I think in this case, we all wanted I should say, a lot more transparency. Like, you're the largest software company in the world. You make the operating system that, look, if we don't use it, we interact with it in some way and rely upon it for some things. And if, okay, I'm a Linux user, like, here's a not so secret, I still have a Windows machine in my possession, like my emergency Windows machine. Hal Pomerantz is also, agreed to this. So, like, whatever, right? They have a big stake in the game in terms of technology. When there's a breach like this, we want transparency. We don't want hand waving. We don't want the magic pixie dust. We don't want all that. We just want transparency. When that happens.
Is Microsoft, having said, they had no comment. Now I'm thinking, but are they just wanting to get the facts straight and get the story straight?
Could be.
Do they have a track record of saying something eventually? I think they do.
I think so. I don't like to bash Microsoft because
Unless they deserve it.
In certain circumstances, they might deserve it, but also
they know
with
where you
Microsoft,
live.
18 years doing this show, oftentimes they redeem themselves as well, right?
Yep.
Because I don't think that Microsoft as a whole, with the hundreds of thousands of employees, like, is an evil company and all the people who work there are evil. That is like the furthest thing from the truth. And the track record I've seen for the, again, 18 years of the show and 20 plus years in the industry, right? Like, most of the time they want to do the right thing. And when they don't, they redeem themselves. They made the Zune players, and we can forgive them for that.
I mean, I don't know.
Apple's not without its misses too.
Of course,
Lisa
the Newton.
What was the Newton? The
Newton.
Thank you.
Yep, the Apple Newton. Yeah. And the other one too is, Paul. It's kind of weird to say this potentially about Microsoft, but what's the saying is that never assume evil intent when incompetence will work just fine.
No, I agree.
Yeah,
but I don't also think this is incompetence. This is just, look, you got to give every company some degree of variance or like a pass for, like, everyone makes mistakes. You know what I mean? It's all about how you handle those mistakes.
And
no person or company is perfect.
And handling those mistakes will change over time, and it will even change for the same mistake over time.
And it'll change per situation, per incident, right? And I think overall, Microsoft's done a great job of coming around and trying to do the right thing, right? I mean, they're at least not. Now I got to talk about HP because this one really.
Oh my God!
Larry, you put this story in here, Larry.
Oh my God!
I read this entire story, and I watched the video with the CEO, which was very eye-opening.
I didn't watch the video. I read the story, and I literally had to look at the calendar to see if it was April 1st.
Yeah.
Because
so let's
set the stage.
So there is a class action lawsuit. So this is somewhat historical that HP at some point in time, and it probably varies based on device, right? But at some point in time, started pushing out firmware updates for their printers that would detect if you had installed a third-party, I don't know if it was ink and laser, but at least ink cartridge that was not from HP.
Yep.
And so your HP printer then would cease to function and go, you got to get this thing out of me. It's just, it's not from HP. It's not certified. Therefore, this new firmware update is not going to work. Now,
or the firmware update will work, but you can't print. You can't print until you
but
put
the printer
actual
will cease to function. Right. Now, the HP CEO says, well, you know, we put like on the labeling and the packaging of the boxes that like only works with HP certified supplies and such, right?
Yep.
I don't know if that means you got to get your paper and your ink cartridges and your
Kinda
laser
sounds that way.
cartridges from HP. And there's a lot of interesting aspects to this. Well, one thing that I think might grind my gears the most is their CEO, and I forget his name. HP CEO said, we're moving towards printing as a service. And how I take that is, this guy kind of has a dotted line to John Deere as well. They're like, I don't really own the device. I'm really just renting it or licensing it, right? Like, yeah, I paid you money to acquire this device, and then,
but I don't really own it.
I really don't own it because I can't really do whatever I want with it. There's rules around how I can use it, and I have to subscribe to this service that will include like my maintenance for it. So I will have to get ink cartridges from you as part of a subscription service. Who knows if they go to, if you want firmware updates, it has to be a service. I don't know if that relates to Cisco and their service offering too, right? But
Tesla and their heated seats.
it is very akin to...
Or was it? It wasn't Tesla. It was BMW.
Tesla,
It was BMW and their heated seats. You had to pay a fee for a service to have your heated seats.
continue to function.
Yep.
Different from Tesla, where it's an option.
Yep.
Similar, but slightly different in that in some model Teslas, you had to buy the upgrade to enable the heated seats.
Yep. But it was a software upgrade.
But it's a software upgrade.
And when you sold your Tesla or you traded it in, the next person that bought it, because it was software, the next person didn't necessarily get that upgrade.
It wipes away as that hardware device changes hands.
Interesting.
Which is interesting. So
using that model for printers is weird.
Well, I mean, it's not. I don't think it's weird. I don't think it's right.
Yeah.
But if you look at it from HP's perspective, you take a loss on every printer that you sell, the hardware.
Right.
You take a loss. The CEO says it in the interview. We take a loss. In the interview, asked well, hold on. If I buy a printer for $300, like, how much you losing? And he's like, oh, no, I can't tell you that. Like, competitive stuff and blah, blah, blah. Okay, whatever.
Okay, but you're losing money.
Anyway, what you want. So you're losing money. He's like, we make our money in the supplies afterwards.
Yep.
Therefore, we're going to pin you into, you have to buy HP supplies.
It's like gas stations don't really make money selling gas. They make money on people going in and buying
Slim Jims and soda.
Cigarettes, and Slim Jims, and lottery tickets.
Yep. And this reeks of the story from a couple of weeks ago with was it the Polish trains?
Yeah.
Like, we'll sell you these trains, but you can only get them serviced at our service center and no third party.
Hey, just a reminder, Paul. I forget what year it was, 17 maybe, but I went out to HP.
Yeah.
I went out to HP as a security influencer, whatever, representing All Security Weekly.
Yep, I remember that. Now, here's the kicker.
Is the best part of the story. I'm kind of hung up on the right
the licensing model,
whether you really own the device or not, right?
Come on, get to the juicy bit.
The juicy bit, Lee. Thank you. The juicy bit is, and it is quoted, and I watched him say this live on the air. This, I think it was a CNBC or something or other interview, and he says, "Well, if you buy a third-party ink cartridge, the firmware on that ink cartridge could contain." He used the term virus. I'll use the term malware, malicious software, malicious firmware. When you put it in your printer, that firmware can then, malicious software could then infect your printer. And then from there, by infecting your printer, could infect other things or compromise other things within your network. And the Ars Technica article dove in on this, interviewed a whole bunch of security researchers. And basically what I gathered from that article was technically possible. Debatable in this case. Like,
mean-
usually when I say technically possible, I'm like, well, like we're hackers, we could figure something out, and like maybe in certain circumstances. But when I read the article, I was like, kind of like in this case, this is like, even in my assessment, where I'm usually on the side of, yeah, this could happen. And maybe it's not the norm now, but like this could happen. But even in this case, I'm kind of like, I don't know. Like, this is like it also. But let's back up.
Title of the article implies this is nation state level. James Bond style.
Still,
Feasible, but
still,
would be really.
yeah, and I mean, arguably nation state level. And if you thinking about the technology portions of that, how much data is actually being exchanged from the cartridge to the printer? The one we talked about
But before
hold on. What's the volume of data?
like you're saying, it's like
how
what
much
are you working with?
Yeah, and like how much data can actually be contained on that cartridge, on a legitimate HP cartridge, which is what they're claiming they need to have. And if you could do that on a third-party cartridge, like what, the technical limitations to get malware from the cartridge to the printer are pretty fucking insane.
Right.
Yeah.
So if they're worried about that, then what's to say that someone couldn't take a legitimate HP cartridge and redo the data that is on a legitimate cartridge to be put into a HP printer to do the same attack? What this really tells me is that HP doesn't care about sanitizing their inputs for what is coming from the cartridge.
Well, I mean, you got to think about it. It's like,
Jeff's.
But is there but go to cryptography, Jeff. Like, is there some cryptographic way that they're validating the cartridge to the printer? Probably not, right?
No, I think Larry's probably right. But just a clarification, because it's bugging me, is a microchip on an ink cartridge firmware, or is the ink cartridge a removable media?
That's a Tyler question. I would venture to guess that it's more of a microcontroller and microcontroller code.
Yep,
that's on an inkjet cartridge.
Agreed, but
it's
I think
not like it's not firmware. It's not like booting an operating system.
it's a firmware.
It's firmware.
But Jeff's comment was, is it removable media?
No.
And I'd say no, it's probably not. I mean, technically, it's media that's removable.
Everything's removable. It all depends on how good you are with a soldering iron or how to rework.
Lee, you were saying something there.
If we're good enough to take an existing cartridge and update the firmware, I mean, couldn't we be good enough to take our own cartridge and make it past the DRM check?
I agree, Lee. I agree with you.
Yep.
Because I have personally witnessed like times where firmware is encrypted.
Yep.
To protect intellectual property and prevent tampering and or analysis. I've seen several instances, including where I work, but not exclusive to where I work, where people are like, oh, yeah, we can get around that. We can decrypt it. The key is somewhere. We can find it, kind of thing, for sure. But I mean, like, let's play the scenario out. Like, so you're gonna get in the supply chain of a printer, go through the laborious effort of trying to get malware on a likely small microcontroller that's on an ink cartridge that's then going to infect, like, because the next challenge you have is, how do I infect the firmware that's on a printer, which is likely no small feat. And then from there, you got to get code running on that printer that's going to go jump off to something else that's like a potentially big unknown, right, of some kind,
and you're likely talking about having to do that with very, very small amounts of code.
And like, also, let's
not impossible,
but like, let's also think about how many different models of ink cartridges and printers are out there, and all of these models are different, which means your code's going to work on one, but it's not going to necessarily work on the other.
I mean, there's probably a lot more commonality.
It's an awful lot of effort to go through to be like, well, I could just password spray or use an RCE that I found on your VPN appliance.
Jeff's going to say something about small bits of code here.
All I'm going to say is James Bond always had specific targets
Right.
Yep.
So I think we're talking a targeted attack.
This is targeted.
where
I agree.
If the payoff is, if the target is lucrative enough, yeah, some nation state's going to go to this effort. I can't imagine what 3-letter agency in this country would do something like this. Let's use our imagination.
Yeah.
But absolutely, if it's doable, they would do it if they had the right target in mind.
Yeah.
And might they have to infiltrate the supply chain system to do it through 1,000 systems and hope that one of those systems gets to the desired target, or do they figure out how to intercept the specific printer that's going to a specific target?
If this target organization is up against a nation state, and the nation state's like 3-letter government agencies, like, look, the only way we're getting into this target
is a printer cartridge.
We're putting malware on a printer cartridge that we're somehow going to get them to install, and we're going to infect the printer and then jump off from there. I want to talk to whoever's securing that organization, because holy crap.
and think about that, dude.
How many other inconveniences have you built in where if that's the attack vector?
Right. And quite honestly, think about, we just learned some stuff, what was it, a couple of weeks ago, about Natanz and how that stuff got infected. It was the U.S. recruited some double agent from the Netherlands to actually bring the stuff into Natanz.
Oh, I didn't know it was from the Netherlands. That's
for a
new.
Dutch guy.
New,
that was within the last couple of weeks. Yeah.
I knew it was someone they brought in as a contractor, right?
It was somebody that the folks at the Natanz facility that had brought in, that the U.S. recruited to infiltrate that stuff. What does it cost to throw someone some money to, hey, go bring this thing into this place and do that thing?
Right. Versus the development cost of, let's get malware on an ink cartridge
and have and not have a really good, having to figure out how to narrow that scope.
The reliability of the inkjet attack versus the, let's find a person and give them something on a USB thumb.
Throwing wild stuff out there. Let's say it costs $1 million to develop that attack.
Yeah.
And you can't really guarantee that it's ever going to get to that organization and doesn't harm a whole bunch of others.
$100,000 in a duffel bag to someone, to contract.
Heck, $500,000 in a duffel bag.
Sure.
Or $1 million in a duffel bag, and your reliability goes up.
Yeah, it's more reliable. You're right.
Yeah.
Of course, I can't find it right now when I want it, but I know it's public. But the Russians back in the Cold War, they basically manufactured a transmitter that
for a typewriter.
For typewriter, but it was the pressure bar, the roll bar that would snap down on the big rubber bar.
Yep.
So it was, quarter of an inch wide, 10 inches long, and the whole thing was, most of it was an antenna. And it was I've seen it. I think maybe the National Cryptologic Museum has it. I know I've seen pictures of it.
I've seen pictures of it online.
Might be the Spy Museum, Jeff.
It became public, Jeff. Yeah.
It's definitely public. And amazing, and amazing technology, amazing manufacturing, craft, and well, who would do that? It would take a lot of work. It would take a lot of.
But now
it happens.
Now, Jeff, absolutely, and the cost of that attack, and reliability may have been a lot easier because they could much more easily infiltrate the supply chain and had higher reliability in infiltrating that supply chain. I'd argue, because it was a different time back then, and people treated society differently. So just a guess.
Well, and that's also part of the business. I'll tell one brief story, and I won't tell much, but there was a time when I was there when we were working, when we were defensive. And we didn't call it that, but there was the organization that, let's say, where the TAO came from or evolved from. They got in touch with us one time because they had acquired a hard drive, and they had 48 hours, and they gave it to us to see what we could get off of it. And we had a time frame because we had a time frame. Yep. Use your imagination.
I'm using my imagination, and when you said that, Jeff,
yeah. So, how does somebody get a hold of a hard drive and they got to put it back? So they're,
Well, I think it's like an answer.
That's where it's not hacking anymore. It's good old fashioned espionage.
Yeah, I think it's like it's like an answering machine that you got to swap out. Did they swap out the answering machine in sneakers?
They did.
They swapped it out, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
They got the identical model. Yep.
Which you should remember because it is the best hacker move.
I mean, he doesn't because he doesn't watch it enough because he doesn't think it's the best.
I'm gonna challenge you, Jeff, to wear a sneakers T-shirt. I'm just saying. I found my hacker.
I actually ordered it during the first segment.
Are you serious? Get out! That's awesome. I love this rivalry. I think it's amazing.
So I was going to surprise you, but it's out now. You won't know what it looks like.
So next week I'm going to have to come with my winter hat that says "Hack the Planet" and my other hackers T-shirt, which is this. We're in full battle mode right now.
It's on.
Maybe. Let's talk after the show.
show.
I have an idea. Remind me after the show.
Okay.
I have an idea. It's
Okay.
a lot of fun. All right. I just want to say I don't agree with HP on this whole thing because again, it feels like I don't really own what I buy. I'm just leasing it. Now, it's interesting we talked about Microsoft before that. I don't really own Windows. I'm just licensing it from them, and they made that whole. I don't necessarily disagree with that business model, especially when it's software.
But we haven't
right?
really talked about, is the guy just bullshitting us and making up a cybersecurity hacker excuse for?
Yeah, I totally think that's the case.
They're just trying to make money.
They're trying to make money. They're like, this is a threat. I think what we established that, yeah, it could be a threat, but like it's not tops on your priority list because I tell you what, to get into most organizations, I think Larry had a great story about Natan's like the physical human aspect. When we're talking nation states, especially that have a particular target in mind, is more reliable and probably more cost effective than what we're describing in this very specific and very nuanced and technically extremely challenging attack of infecting the ink cartridge to infect the printer to infect the rest of the network. Right. While not like totally out of the realm of possibility, what people have weighed in with is that like it's really hard. And I think we're all on the side of like it's
and if that,
there's another evil possibility.
Oh, I like evil possibilities.
Ooh. So having recently bought a new HP printer, they really push you hard to subscribe to their ink service.
Well, that's what he said.
I can see a future where that's the only source of ink for them. There's going to be no more cartridges, legit cartridges, and they'll crank the knob super hard on DRM on that.
Absolutely. And that's their business model, Lee. Because again,
I wonder if they're
not selling as many, but they're not selling as many printers. Right?
No, they're an ink company that sells printers.
They're selling printers at a loss. So that's not like really if you're selling something at a loss, that's not a business. That's not even a really good charity at that point, right? Like, but so one of the things that Lee, you kind of triggered in my brain to talk about is that as a consumer, I'd like to have options. Mm-hmm. If I'm a consumer that's like, you know what, give me the printer for free or really cheap. And then subscribe me to your service. And if I'm choosing that, cool. Like there may be certain circumstances where I'm like, look, to avoid any like printer issues that you might with your printer, there's a certain percentage of population that you're like, look, like get the. I think HP should almost give it away or like make it really cheap, and then go look, subscribe to our service. Fine. If that gives me this printer for a really long time and I pay like a monthly or yearly fee and it works and I get paper and I get ink and it all just kind of works, great, let me choose that option. But give me an option where the printer's more expensive, but I can do what I want with it, right? Like give me the option. I'm a huge fan of options because not every consumer is the same. The CEO was quoted as like, it's not that users are investing in HP, it's that HP is investing in a user. HP doesn't want to invest in a user that isn't going to consume a lot of ink because they're gonna lose, and like that's a bad investment for us. I'm like, oh my God, like what a strange way to think about a business model, right?
Right, and the killer is this is really a not a business level market. They're targeting small business and home users in that kind of space. I mean, they have other printers that are much different that don't even seem to play in this. So it's
but also crazy. Lee, I think for me too, like if I was to do the subscription model, I'd also want like a new printer every 3 to 5 years or whatever.
Yeah.
Really,
Paul?
give me
aren't printers kind of going away?
Yeah,
Unless
I
they're,
mean,
like,
there's
printing
also
Yeah.
that, Jeff. I think there's some businesses that do rely on printers. I think personally, the amount of
Well, I'll
like I
tell
was
you,
talking about it before the show. I'm like, how much do we actually print? Now the interesting
Less
thing
than
is
we
like
ever did.
convenience when I do need to print something, like I need it like now. Like I'm going out the door and like this has to be printed, and it's
Nice.
rare.
Yep.
But like it has to be printed because my other part of my brain's like, what if I could just have a service where like I don't need to own a printer?
It's called Staples.
It's called Staples, right? Like I send it out
Right.
somewhere and they print it and I go pick it up. I mean, it's kind of inconvenient
Well,
where
I
I can
mean,
have it.
and there's probably, and I'm sure there's probably a DoorDash version where you just send it out there and they deliver it to you. And if
Sure,
they haven't done
probably.
that, it's a great idea.
It's a great idea. You know
when
what?
I
It
was-
would be awesome for DoorDash to have like
offer-
a print, to have
pick
like a
up
print
your
service. Like
print
you can
jobs.
add on, like I'm ordering tacos, and by the way,
Pick up my
here's this-
printout at
here's this
Staples.
document that I've
So
sent to
pick up
Staples.
my
Like go pick it
tacos,
up,
my
deliver
printout, and
my
my
food,
snacks.
and like my
Pick up
my
the 100
ticket.
copies of my resume.
Yeah.
What was that, Lee?
I said, bring
When I-
me my tacos, my printout, and my Mucinex. Remember the ad
Yeah.
they did?
Yes.
When I
The
was
other
out
fun
at
thing is
HP,
Is it
Go ahead.
Epson and Canon or both? Now what they're doing is they're selling bottles of ink to refill the cartridges.
They're an ink company that sells a printer. Like, here we
Right.
go again.
Yeah.
But maybe with a better model? I don't know.
Yeah. One of the people
So-
I met up because the HP printer division used to be in the Boise area. I think it still is, but this guy was in their security arm and he was talking about some of the crazy shit that they've run across, but not in the context of cartridges and the security they worry about with these printers.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he'd be an interesting one to have on a show, but like I said, I don't remember talking about cartridge security. There was other things he was worried about because you are putting the printer on your network and on media and all this other crud,
Sure.
which is much higher risk.
All right. Do we? Anything else on printers? Final
yes,
closing
when
thoughts on printers.
closing thought, when I was at HP, whatever year that was, they gave us a tour of their R&D lab, and they had they weren't showing us the most cool newest home edition laser printer. They had one printer that literally printed a 3-foot by 5-foot poster in full color. Think a global map in 12 seconds.
Jesus.
Wow.
That was amazing. And then they were doing a lot with 3D printing. And then I couldn't even begin to explain it to you because it went over my head. But they were doing printing in the realm of healthcare, like printing
Organs.
stuff that they would eventually put in your not organs, but like.
Oh, like with 3D printing, bone replacement.
stents and implants and yeah.
But more than that, and of course it was probably very experimental, and I probably shouldn't talk about it anyway. But it was more along the lines of stuff that they could inject into your bloodstream to combat disease type of stuff. I mean, it was almost like it was out there stuff. So maybe that stuff hasn't taken hold yet, and they're not selling it as much, and they gotta foot the bill somewhere.
Just don't get Boris. Just don't get Boris to fix that one.
The future for them is not the home.
No, I
printer.
agree. But that stuff, Jeff, to your point, could be 10 years away. Even from today, 10 years away, that's their business model. But in the meantime, they've got to rape everyone on printer stuff.
One of my last final thoughts is that I think some of the stuff is ridiculous in that we have an HP printer at home. It's a LaserJet. We print so little that every once in a while we get the thing from our Amazon Echo that says, "Hey, we noticed you bought a print cartridge from us. It's getting low." I'm like, no, it's not. Like the printer's right there. No, it's not. But because Amazon does the thing along the lines of, hey, that average person that prints and buys this type of thing prints so many pages, it's probably about low.
It's not communicating with your printer. It's just based that on.
I mean, it might be communicating with a printer, but nope, it's not low enough because I will run that thing until it's dry and there's no yellow coming out of it.
Yeah,
type
I
of thing.
agree.
My final printer thought, Larry, you'll be happy to know, is that printer that I've had for probably 13 years that I couldn't interface with because the program was running on an old version of Flash.
Oh, geez.
Went out of support. I finally just threw it away. So
Well, you said it to the electronics recycler, right?
Yes,
Yes.
I definitely dropped it off at the recycling.
You know what
place.
though? One thing you're not going to throw away is your $250,000 supercomputer.
I mean,
It's in the museum.
depending on how old it is.
Well, so let's say it's a new one from NVIDIA.
Okay.
So it's my story number 2. NVIDIA DGX A100 is like this AI supercomputer thing. Now, like, I don't know a lot about this particular computing platform. What I know now is that yes, NVIDIA makes them, and they start. What I'm told is like around $250,000 is what I'm told. And there could be there's different models, and some could be more expensive, less expensive. But like, let's just say for sake of argument, $250,000 things. And therefore, I think largely now today, AI applications,
most likely.
Most likely. And they had some pretty heinous bugs in the BMC for these particular supercomputers.
For our listeners, explain BMC real quick.
So baseboard management controller. So it's the computer inside your computer that gives you administrative access.
Out of band management.
Out of band management. Also complete access to all the hardware.
Yep.
So think of it like if your brain is the computer, there's a chip and that gives you full access to all of your brain.
Yep.
Like it has tentacles. That was the one realization I had.
I've seen enough hentai to know where this is going.
Brainstem.
Yeah, it's weird how like you just like I always thought of it as a computer in such a computer, but then you think of it as well, it has direct access to all the other hardware, so it's hardwired into all of the different subsystems, CPU, RAM, networking, buses, all that stuff, because it has to function like that, right?
It's the medulla oblongata. That's what I had to look it up.
I like it. So
The brainstem.
now
It's where you're brain dead, you're still breathing. It's
right.
That.
So the some advice I saw on this one was from Hackaday, which I thought helped contextualize this. They're like, well, like don't put your supercomputer on the internet. And I'm like, well, okay, well, hold on. Like, let's dig into that for a moment. Like
that ship sailed a long time.
Yeah, like if we just don't connect our computers to the internet, we're more secure. We all know that. But the internet exists so that we can connect our computers together, and we benefited from that.
And I will argue that's not necessarily the case anymore. We talked about this whole printer thing and getting stuff into computers that are not connected to the networks with Natanz.
Yes,
it can be done.
Well, so the problem is,
what was the premise of the movie War Games?
Right. So, but like the problem is that these baseboard management controllers are meant to be connected to something, to a network somewhere where an administrator can access them. Because let's say your supercomputer or supercomputing cluster goes down, you got to have some out of band management to connect to a network, whether over the internet, a VPN, or like I got to drive in and I got to jack into a network. Like the whole point is I don't have to be directly connected to one computer. I can be connected to the network where I'm able to manage out of band, separate from the network that they're doing the computing platform
and you
on.
probably want to be able to do that because you want your $250,000 supercomputer to be up.
Correct. Or apply maintenance to it or what have you. So I think also attackers could get on the same network. So the solution is not don't connect them to the network because that defeats the purpose of having a BMC. The solution to the security problem here is like make sure your stuff is patched, make sure it's hardened, make sure there's proper authentication. Like this stuff has to be accessed. So like when often at Eclipse, like I've seen these stories where it's like, well, just don't expose it to the internet or connect it to the network. I'm like, that
ship has sailed, as Jeff said.
You're not solving the problem. The problem is there's software vulnerabilities in
what
the
was
BMC
the first
firmware.
operating system to receive C2 certification from NSA?
What's C2?
Anyone?
C2? You mean it can do command and control?
It was a level of trust. It's secure. You can use it.
Bell Labs Unix.
It was It was Windows NT, but the caveat was it only had the certification as long as it was not networked. And I have to mention,
Details need to be omitted.
What was that, Lee?
Nitpick, and I have a serious question. My nitpick is this article talks about this whole list of CVEs as potential vulnerabilities. Nitpick. It's either a vulnerability or it's not.
I agree.
But out of curiosity, the first two CVEs listed, they've got this is a question for you, Paul, because I know you've been looking into CVEs a lot lately. Their scores are 9.3.
Yeah.
What is not there that makes it a 9.3 instead of a 10? Typically, I mean, because it says critical. I'm just curious.
Yeah.
Why didn't it get the whole 10?
So
Do you know?
You calculate the CVSS based on basically answers to a series of questions, right?
Yep.
Like, is it remotely exploitable? Does the exploit give you a certain level of privilege, like admin or not? And like based on so the way I understand it is based on the answers to those questions in the formula for CVSS, Jeff, that's what derives the score. So in this case,
I get
and
that.
I'm glad you asked this question, because in this case, NVIDIA, who is the vendor that creates in this case, hardware and software that has the flaw, calculated the score.
Right.
So they looked at the vulnerability, they plugged in the answers to the questionnaire for CVSS, and they came up with a 9.3. Now, if you look at the NVD entry for this, so NVD, so the CVE is MITRE, the scoring portion of that, from what I understand, is NVD, can also calculate a score. So like NVD is supposed to be this like independent third party of CVSS scoring calculation. Now they haven't scored some of these yet. NVIDIA has scored them. So this kind of begs the question. In the past few episodes I've talked about this, like how do you, and you can calculate your own score, right? So you got the vendor, you got like the government essentially, and you've got you anyone as an individual can calculate a score. Do you average those? It's somewhat subjective is my point, Jeff. But
I remember looking at the scoring.
But given it the vendor, I mean, the vendor kind of has they're biased, right? So, like, typically what I see is like the vendor, right? The vendor kind of scores it in traditionally lower. I mean, someone could do a complete study. I would implore someone to do this, right? Like, you could look at all the CVEs out there and look at all of the scoring and look at who the vendor has scored them versus NVD has scored them, and look at the differences. And you could do, it's basically a bunch of math. You could do that. I'd actually be curious to see what you would.
Yeah, I mean, it was more of a rhetorical question. I didn't expect you to know the exact answer, but I'm curious because I remember when I was still at Tenable, when CVSS version 3 came out, and kind of digging in the details of it. And I think it was around that time or shortly thereafter, somebody did a study and found out that like 98% of the vulnerabilities that are disclosed have the exact same CVSS score, because there's certain common answers that just all plop to the same number. Maybe I'll do the research on it. I'll report back to it. I'll take that as a homework assignment.
Yeah. But the other thing is you're supposed to take and apply some environmental modification to that score. You don't take it at its value. That's the base. But I'm sure the vendors never game the system. I mean, what the hell?
Nah.
Wait,
I see a lot of tomfoolery when it comes to that, Lee. And the tomfoolery applies to certain interpretations, like I've talked about Intel and privilege escalation. They'll classify things as this is privilege escalation. And what that really means is that if I have no privileges on the system and I don't have a valid user account,
and I get some privileges,
but without any authentication, I can do command injection, that's somehow local privilege escalation, when that's really, in my mind, remote code execution. It has nothing to do with privilege
or
escalation.
authentication bypass, for that matter.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
But did anybody ever benefit from getting wheel group access as opposed to root access?
I mean, yeah, because then you do local privilege escalation.
Yeah. Because wasn't wheel group 1? Isn't that 1, Larry?
I think so. I think so.
But
but
I
still,
argue that all systems, not even specific to an operating system, but all systems, even independent of the actual operating system, may treat the level of privilege differently and unique to that application. And specifically, I'm talking about one of my stories that talks about Android and how they were able to manipulate privileges on a specific version of Android that was created for point of sale systems in Poland. And if you read through their entire
if we're going to talk about Android, if we're going to talk about Android, I need an ice cube because I need something stronger to drink. Sorry,
I'm getting an ice cube for Larry. So
here,
I don't. So it's my story number 4, and I think it's a good segue actually, because there was a company that basically they identified a lot of really interesting Android hacks and vulnerabilities, hyper specific to PAX point of sale systems that, from what I understand, are being implemented in Poland. And a lot of it has to do, Jeff, when we talk about encryption, right, is often the implementation. And that's a lot of what I'm seeing in Android, that Android has some amazing facilities to provide protection and very good security of that operating system and even applications. They state right in this article that on Android, you can sandbox applications. However, if there's an application with a higher privilege level that has been implemented poorly, you can gain the privileges of that application, and then that sandboxing kind of goes out the window. So Google, in my estimate, has done a great job to provide a lot of really secure options, but oftentimes what we see is poor implementation of those particular options and features that Google has made available. And that varies based on the feature that you're talking about. I mean, I've run into roadblocks where, for example, and if anyone knows how to break this, I'm really impressed because I've done some research on it. So I have a Pixel 2 XL, and it's OEM locked, which prevents me from doing certain things on it. And from everything I can gather, if the provider like Verizon or AT&T has OEM locked this device, there's no, on this platform, no getting around that, right? Now, when I read this article about Android, I'm like, oh, there could be opportunities to get around this, but it requires that the implementer and whoever has customized Android has made some mistakes. Since Google created Android, and this is a Google device, they did a pretty good job of locking it down.
Agreed.
Right? And not true for all of these Pixel devices, and not true for every version of Android, right? So we're on, what are we on, Android 14 now? Is 14 the latest?
So.
I think 14 is the latest, right? Your mileage varies. You go back to Android 4, all the way to Android 14, everywhere in between, and it all kind of varies. In any case, my story number 4 was really interesting. If you want to look at some interesting ways to bypass controls in things like bootloaders and such on Android, they reference, oh my God, it's an amazing read. In my story number 4, they reference, they're like, oh, we use this method to bypass bootloader protections. And it's basically, let's see if I can do it justice. In fast boot mode, there's an OEM specific option that lets you load in a initram FS from the bootloader into memory that gets written to a root file system. And they're like, oh, this method was talked about in this 2017 paper. And they link to that paper, and that paper is like pages and pages long. I'm like, oh my God, this is like amazing research. It's really fascinating. I'm doing some Android stuff. I'm working on an Android, little spoiler alert, an Android cheat sheet for folks on how to interrogate your Android, whatever it is, and figure out if it's been owned, if there's supply chain issues with it is kind of my take. So I'm doing some research on that now. I hope to publish that in the coming week.
The answer, if there's supply chain issues with it and it didn't come from Google, the answer is yes.
Yeah, I mean,
Do any of the mobile operators have the opportunity to install software on it if it doesn't come from Google?
yeah.
Yes.
Well, see, but
Yes. Then you have supply chain issues.
well, it's different if the hardware and the operating system came from Google is one thing. So, like if you have a Pixel, for example, right? And they've done different things to lock down in various ways, different Android devices. So I have other Android devices that I can root, that I can.
Yep.
Oh, so it depends on not just Google, but like what the cellular provider has done to customize
Supply chain.
Like the Android thing is it's super fascinating. But there's also like
I mean, if you call a shit show fascinating, then sure.
it is a shit show. I think you can do a great job of just like anything else. You can do a great job of locking down Android, and it all depends on like what you're after, right? And like some manufacturers are not interested in locking it down; they want to let their users tinker. Like OnePlus devices or some of the devices out there, they're like. When I look at all these alternative Android platforms like Grafana and Lineage, they're, like OnePlus is like, yeah, I don't care what you do. Like we're going to say, back to the HP example, they're like, I don't care. You're going to pay us X amount of dollars for a phone. Like what you do with it after that, I don't care. You can run our operating system or anyone else's operating system. I don't care. You paid us X amount for the phone. I'm cool with that, right? But again, go through my story number 4. Is that a OnePlus? Which one is that now?
The 4?
4.
I don't know. It's a couple of models back, but it works just fine. Thank you very much.
I thought I had something else in there about Android. Did I?
I don't know. What about? Go ahead, Lee.
I was sitting here going, what version of Androids is on these packed devices they were testing? I mean, I'm pretty sure it's not 14.
No, definitely not 14. My estimation, Lee, is there are a plethora of Android devices out there on like a bunch of different, again, we can go back to Android 4 is some of the ones I see referenced as some of the earlier versions. And you're marching all the way to 14 and everywhere in between and different variations and versions from different OEMs and vendors. But where this came in is the Bluetooth keystroke injection.
Oh,
My story number 17. So this is the guy, I forget his name, but this is the person who created mouse jacking.
Oh.
Right? And so the person that created mouse jacking also figured out that Bluetooth stacks on Linux, Android, Windows, iOS in some capacity, and there's a whole matrix of like what's vulnerable and how it's vulnerable on the link that I provide in the show notes of my story number 17. Larry, you also had the story.
Yep, and it was actually carried over from last week because we didn't get to it and we felt it was important.
Yes, and also I don't think everything was available last week. Is that true?
It was.
It was? Because, hold on, I can get the person's name now. Mark Newland presented Hi, My Name is Keyboard at ShmooCon. I can't wait till this video is released because I totally want to watch this this video because I think it's awesome. So Mark figured out is that basically in certain configurations on certain number of platforms, Android aside, Android is one of them though, that he can inject keystrokes. Now, this means you pair with the device to inject these keystrokes. And again, it's very specific. Magic keyboards are in a different category from Android, Linux, macOS, iOS, Windows, in different versions. And he's got a whole like matrix of like what's vulnerable and how it's vulnerable. It's interesting. I have a Pixel 2 XL device. In my testing, I think I got it like running versus working are two different things. I got it running, but my Pixel 2 XL was end of life in 2020 in terms of updates, right? And but it's running Android 11. Android 11 is one of those that they issued a security patch for. But he says that the patch level that's fixed is 2023-12-05. But if I look at my Android 11, on my Pixel 2 XL, it's a 2020 patch level. And I don't know if there's another patch that came down that's not indicated. I haven't interrogated that enough to see.
And it was likely that 2023 patch was for this particular vulnerability.
Correct.
As opposed to if it was at 2020, it should still be vulnerable, but.
Yeah, I did. So, but
there's probably something missing.
I got to the point where I executed the attack because Mark provides all the tools for you to do on Linux with any number of Bluetooth devices. I was using the what is the red one?
Piranha Santa UD100.
UD100. I was using the UD100, and I got it so that my Pixel 2 XL was like, "Hey, do you want to allow this device to pair?" But when Mark describes like if the attack actually works properly, it won't ask the user; it just injects those keystrokes.
Right, because it effectively does key recovery. So
if you can inject keystrokes, man, I saw a video on I think it was Instagram where someone had it where it was opening Chrome and downloading a payload and connecting back to an interpreter.
All doable.
And again, it's
keystrokes.
It's ducky scripts, right?
Yeah.
Like you're basically taking a ducky. It's just a ducky script that's being translated at that point. So, yeah, I don't know how like impactful this is because again, like Android 4.2 through 10, he says there's no fix available. He says Android 3 and earlier were not tested, and there's a CVE assigned to that. Android 11, 12, 13, 14 have been fixed. Like most Android devices, at least phones, I should say, you find today are 11, 12, 13, 14, right? But there's still a lot of older Android out there.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many, like my treadmill at home still runs Android.
Yep.
And they're not updating that. I don't know which version of Android is. I don't remember. I think I have that somewhere in some kind of scan or packet capture, but...
Is it bad if my mobile device is from 2017?
I'd have to do math and figure out what version of Android is it.
I don't know. How do I tell?
System settings.
Let me look. Carry on. I'll see if I can figure it out.
There's a in settings. I think you go to system and you go to advanced and you go to about. I forget the exact navigation. Somewhere in there, it'll tell you your Android version. Or you can use the Android debugger, and you can fetch a certain property, get props, ADB, get props, and there's a certain property. That'll be my cheat sheet, by the way, how to query over the Android debugger what version it is. Did you test this?
Carry on. I'll look it up.
I was juggling multiple things this week, and I got it installed, but didn't get a chance to test it. And went to go test it last night and juggled something else into that spot. And I was going to do it here, but didn't. No. So,
the interesting thing about this range of updates for Android is pretty much the OEMs only support OS updates for 2 years and then security updates for the third. So, if somebody's last 2-year-old update was to Android 11, I don't think they're going to get this update from 23 because Android 11 was 4 years ago?
Correct.
Yep.
I'm running Android 9.
Android 9, yeah, in the way of software updates, buddy.
That's pretty old, dude. That's pretty old.
And I'm proud of it too.
I'm proud of it. I'm Android 9 and I'm proud of it.
Nice. Hey, Paul, one story I'd love to cover real quick because I thought it was pretty interesting, and I wanted to share folks with some of my thought process and so forth.
Okay.
My story number 6, 0-day initiative, the Pwn to Own Automotive 2024 day 1 results.
Yes.
That was updated this morning. It was posted last night, and they only had a limited number of stuff because it was ongoing. But there was a ton of successes against Sony head units, some Alpine and Sony head units, and a bunch of different stuff. A couple of them were known to be or found to be bug collisions with stuff that had already found and so forth. And I'm looking at this and I'm like, okay, so there's some failures here. Sina Kyokura was not able to get his exploit working on the Sony head unit, and then Sina Kyokura couldn't get his thing working on the Phoenix contact stuff, and he couldn't get it on the Pioneer DMH head unit, and he couldn't get it working on the Juicebox smart EV charging station. But he did have some success against one ChargePoint HomeFlex charger. And I thought about like this, like, man, think about how down in the dumps that you've got to be to have so many failures. And then I realized, but this guy had a success and had attempts at 4 or 5 that he didn't succeed at in the time. Like, holy crap, that's huge.
And
something Edison getting the light bulb right.
Yeah, Cena took home $60,000 from this automotive Pono.
Yeah, but like, there was one success for Cena. Apparently, based on the credit, working by himself, with a bunch of other folks, with potentially teams and multiple people. And
Synactive took first at almost $300,000.
The Synactive team. And
NCC Group, which is a prolific researchers, took home $70,000.
Yep.
Cena by himself took home $60,000.
And Ret 2 Systems, but like Cena by himself took home $60,000, but had potentially near working exploits for 4 or 5 others.
It's crazy.
Like, I initially went into this as me being negative Nancy, like, wow, what an idiot, he couldn't get all this stuff to work. And then I realized, wait a minute, he did hold this stuff by himself, and
Synactive
was so close.
In the Bleeping Computer article that I found, I don't know what I linked to in my show notes, but the Synactive team took home $100,000. They successfully chained 3 0-day bugs to get root permissions on a Tesla modem, which is interesting. I think about my Tesla, it communicates via a
Cellular
3G cellular modem.
Mm-hmm.
In the firmware for that modem is where they chain together 3 bugs to get root on the platform that runs that modem. How does that work?
Yeah, it's a good question. We don't know yet.
Money well spent.
Maybe.
I'm going to redact myself from this conversation on this.
It reminds me of the early days of the World Wide Web, where websites would go out in beta version, just inviting people to find bugs with it.
Google.
That was cheaper.
Google.
And also, there's a screenshot showing UID 0, and I want to say UID 1 is not wheel as I thought. It's how do you pronounce DAEMON, Paul?
Damon.
Thank you, Lee.
And wheel is actually UID 10.
10. Yes.
What I thought was interesting about this article, though, is that they hacked an Ubiquiti Connect EV station in a ChargePoint HomeFlex EV charger. Mm-hmm. And I have the Tesla charger at home, and they totally, they totes connect to the network.
Totally.
Right? And they totally run firmware on it.
Totally.
This firmware's got to be totally hackable in some capacity, right?
And I think it looks like they had 3 chargers. They had the Juicebox Smart EV. I think they had the Phoenix Contact, just based on the name that it's the Char X. So it's probably a charger.
Which makes sense, because a lot
the
of
ChargePoint HomeFlex. Yep.
Your charging bricks and laptop chargers have firmware on them essentially. So you got to imagine something that's charging a vehicle has to have firmware on it to talk to the vehicle,
right? To
negotiate charging and all kinds of other things, right?
Yep. Agreed.
And also some kind of web interface too, because you got to set it. It has to connect to the net. I don't know why it has to connect to the network.
Does backend reporting and can charge faster at different times when consumption is low. And you can report back to your app that's in the cloud, so you can see when it's done charging
too. Because your vehicle knows that you have a charging station. Like my Tesla, I want to say knows that I have a charging station at my home. And it kind of works that into the equation. I haven't really dug into exactly how that works. I've always kind of wondered because I think I can say, like, oh, I'm going home, and like it knows that I have a charger at home, so it doesn't make me stop at a charging station if I'm going home. I would imagine. I haven't pushed like the limits on that.
Yeah, but I mean,
necessarily.
I'd love to hear some feedback. Like, why does my charging station really need to be connected to the internet? It needs to provide power to a vehicle, and it needs to talk to the vehicle to negotiate the appropriate charging.
I knew who to ask about all this.
Me too.
You need to get KF on the show.
Yep, me too.
Fill us in on the. He was an early adopter in the. All my Tesla questions are directed to KF. KF, yeah. I'm like, dude, what is this?
Yep.
Interestingly enough, I was talking to a company about getting permanent holiday lighting, and their controller, that you can they expect you to manipulate it for the phone. And they said, yeah, we just plug this into your internet router and you're on, wherever it is. And I'm like, but I don't want it on the internet.
Right.
Why is
they
it?
looked at me like I had two heads. I'm like,
and one of them was on backwards.
It's unusual for people to even consider they may not want something hooked to the internet. I'm like, it's okay. When I want to control it that way, I'll plug it in. Otherwise, I'll disconnect.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They may not know how to have something not connected to the internet.
That's a good point.
What are you, Luddites?
Yep. Well, they want to make sure all the lights that you add to your system come from them, Lee. So therefore, it has to connect to the internet to make sure that you're not connecting third-party lights to your system.
Oh, of course.
Of course. This is the new business model that I hate.
Yes.
I think we talked about bamboo printers last week.
We did.
Yeah,
we did.
Hey, I've only got 4 stories. They're all about breaches. Somebody pick one.
Jeff, I'm going
I went to the trouble of
Jeff,
putting
I'm going
to hold on. I want to go back to. I want to go back to passwords based on your breaches.
and
story because
Jeff, I want to use your story number 1, which is Paul's number 8.
The mother of all breaches. Like normally, I don't pay a whole lot of attention to breaches. And I even think Troy Hunt at this point was kind of like, yeah, whatever, it's another breach. But I think what Troy found was that the data in this particular password breach, which was 26 billion records, which is a lot. But I think the more interesting statistic that Troy was pointing out was like, there's a certain percentage of credentials in this breach that are like never seen before. Right, like they're net new kind of thing. Right. I think a lot of them are older. Like I read Troy's article, and a lot of what folks were saying was like, yeah, it's like kind of older credentials, which not kind of bad,
but previously non-released.
Previously non-released. My advice. Which story is this one of mine? It's in here. Yeah. So like here's my takeaway. Like we can talk about the nuances of the breach and whatever, but the takeaway for me is it's a good time to change your passwords, right? Couple that with a password manager that tells you like this password that you have on this site's the same as this one, or this password's been used in this breach kind of thing. So use that as a tool to one, change your passwords, implement and configure properly multi-factor authentication. So I've been going through my flipper here. Like my flipper can be a U2F device. So I'm enrolling that. I'm a little skeptical because I run third-party firmware on that, but
yeah, your own.
Yeah, I know, my own. But like I'm enrolling that as one of my security devices because largely I keep my flipper in my pocket with me at all times. And so I'm like, well, that's kind of convenient. I can just USB connect that to my computer and roll that as my second factor or a factor. Right. And when I log onto the various services and configure that as my multi-factor, use a password manager, but don't store your like your authentication codes in your password manager. There was a breach a few months ago.
Yeah.
Like I keep certain degrees of separation, right? Like I want certain accounts not to be in my password manager. Which is a very short list of select ones. And then I want everything else to be in my password manager for my passwords. Then I want my other factors of authentication to be completely separate.
To not be in your password manager.
I'm gonna look at passkeys. And like I feel like we've talked about passkeys and then like I forget exactly how they work kind of thing. But passkey is slightly different from the U2F key-based authentication, right? So you get your YubiKeys or anything that implements U2F as a second factor. And I like the Authenticator app, right? So I don't care, whatever it is. If you're going to use Microsoft, if you're going to use, what's the other one? Google has one, right? An Authenticator app that maybe exists on your phone. That can also be on your computer as well. So like configure that, try and get rid of, so where I'm going towards, Jeff, and this kind of breach sparked all of this, right? Where I'm going towards is getting rid of SMS, trying to figure out if anything doesn't have second factor, how do I add second factor, and going towards a U2 or physical device and or an Authenticator app. And then I feel like I can safely get rid of any kind of text-based or email-based second factor authentication, right? Because I feel better that, because someone could compromise your, and SIM swap you, someone could compromise, maybe get access to your email account. I feel like you get better protection from a physical key, a U2F key, and an Authenticator app. So having those as multiple factors in addition to your password.
But my question, Paul, is I use all of those on my mobile phone. I mean, I've got all of them on there, different places I connect to. I've got the Google, I've got the Microsoft one.
What is the Doug Song's company that got bought by Cisco?
Duo.
Duo makes one.
Actually, I used to use Duo, but the one place where I was using it, they updated to some sort of single sign-on thing.
Yeah. But it's a good. I think this is a good time to. You need to get rid of some of the crap.
But my question is, and it's always frustrating because I'll take my laptop to the reading room while my phone is charging, and I'm like, oh, I want to log in and check something. Crap, I got to do the multi-factors. Not doing that right now. But all of my multi-factor is basically on my phone. Whether it's SMS or whether it's email. I mean, even if it's email, it's easier to get it off my phone, especially since I'm already logged in on my phone. And sometimes, I have a traveling laptop where, I'm trying to log on to Cyber Risk Alliance email, and I've got to get the, multi-factor authentication off of something, which if I don't have my phone on me, I've got to go to another, or maybe it's Facebook or something. I don't know, but maybe one of my Google accounts. But I've got a backup account on another email, but I can't log on to that one because it's just
there's certain. I agree. There's certain convenience issues, but I think we're progressing, and I think it's frustrating. It's taken this long. We got to get to a point where it's somewhat convenient. Right?
Right.
Mostly convenient, yeah.
Mostly convenient and mostly secure. And so what I'm advocating for is, like, let's make sure we change all of our passwords, make them unique, use a password manager. Let's make sure we got an Authenticator app. And let's make sure we got some kind of physical token, and we can balance those. And I would dissuade people, and also, in the same token, encourage folks and organizations to get rid of the email and SMS in favor of some more secure mechanisms. Passkey being that kind of thing that in between, and I feel like we've covered passkey. And I also feel like we need to bring someone on who understands passkeys really, really well to kind of help explain it to us as well. Because I feel like we've talked about it in the past, and then I forget like how exactly passkeys work. And there's people like screaming in their cars right now that no one understands and have looked into passkeys. And if you're doing that, like, let's come on the show. Let's talk about like passkeys, how they work, and why we should use them, and how they compare to all these other factors of authentication.
Oh well, I for the password thing. Well, go ahead. Well,
go ahead.
You get three things, and then I get one thing.
So I had three things I wanted to say really quick. One is one of the cool things that's happening. If you got the user who wants to store their passwords in their iPhone, iOS now will check for passwords that are breached and passwords that are crappy and let you know that you need to change them, and even give you a link to go change them. That mostly works, which is kind of cool. So even if you don't have a password manager, at least, and I suspect Android's doing something similar, at least the mobile OS is looking out for your best interest. Now you can still ignore it. Well, okay. The second thing that I thought was really cool is the other day I was visiting my prescription provider, logging in from my phone, and they said, "Hey, wouldn't you really like to set up a passkey for this account and stop using a password?" And I was like, "What? Hell yeah!"
Passkeys see some serious
90
adoption.
seconds.
Yep.
And now when I get the login screen, I just click the button, do the biometrics, and I'm in. It's like, damn.
And I forget. I feel like we talked about how passkeys work under the scenes, and I can't.
Yeah, we could do a show on.
Yeah,
passkeys.
I can't do it justice off the top of my head right now, which is a shame.
No.
But yeah.
And the third piece I had with this particular breach is I was reading, and it's the conglomeration of 3,800 breaches put together, which I think your point about it being new is better than focusing on that being 26 billion records. I mean, I'm sure there's a high overlap between 3,800 breaches, but yeah, that somebody was able to find new stuff is really incredible.
Right.
So
I think the call to action of that is we need to pay attention to all the things we're talking about in this conversation right now. Right.
One other thing to note.
Some stuff to
wait, Larry.
mitigate.
I was next.
No, go ahead, Jeff, and then Larry.
So to Lee's first point about the iPhone checking the passwords, what else is iPhone checking on data that you put in your phone? It's a little disturbing to me. But, everything.
Yes.
The idea of going back to what you were saying, Paul, the idea of everybody should change their password, and obviously 26, 28 billion, however many records, there's 8 billion people on Earth, and only some percentage have
Internet
anywhere.
Yep. Right.
So we used to talk about the idea of using different passwords for different levels of accounts. I mean, I have the throwaway password that I use if I have to register.
We all have those throwaway passwords. Yeah.
So the throwaway passwords, the passwords that need to be better for your banking apps and all that kind of stuff. There's probably a lot of those out there. For those of us that use 3 or 4 different passwords, maybe they're all in that data. And I think the article, at least that I posted, said that they fed all that data into Pwn to Own.
Mm-hmm.
So you can go up. Everybody should look up their passwords. So first question is, do you just change your password, or if you got a really, really good password? I mean, I'm kind of leaning towards see if it's been compromised on Pwn to Own yet, and if it's still a good password, keep it. I'm still not a big fan of password vaults. I'd rather use a really, really long password. I'll give you whatever hash version of my password I can generate for anybody that wants to try to crack it. The guys that run.
Well, I don't think it's about
crack me if you can.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with you, Jeff. I don't think it's about cracking necessarily. I think it's about reuse, right? And because it's not the
it's not
cryptographic. It's not the cryptographic cracking of it. It's that you used it and someone was able to access the back-end database,
or they
get that password. And if you've used that password anywhere else, but we also have to couple this with what's the username too, and then how much effort is it to tie multiple usernames and passwords and ultimately credential sets back to you and figure out where that's used. Yep. And look, I'm not saying that's impossible. That's totally possible, but it's all about how much effort someone's going to put into getting at your shit and targeting you perhaps at the end of the day. And in regards of who you are or what you're doing, you have a bank account and you have stuff of value, and you should be mindful of that. And you should go in and start cleaning that stuff up today, because I think so much time has passed on the internet. We've all used multiple emails and credentials all over the place. We know attackers can put those pieces together. We just need to clean some of that stuff up, and I think that's a task that a lot of us kind of put by the wayside to do that. Okay. I mean, I'm also kind of in the camp where I've got more email addresses than I can shake a stick.
You've got more email addresses than pairs of underwear.
I need to. This year is my year to retire a bunch of those email accounts. Bring it back, and as I bring those back in, right? Change my password and establish like a really like the best multi-factor that I can for that balances both usability and security, which is achievable today. We didn't have a lot of these options 10, 15, 20 years ago, at
There's
our
another
disposal.
way we can help the users. And I almost forgot about it. And that is something I came across a couple years ago, and it's becoming more and more common, is a service that looks through your hash passwords and does comparison with breach dumps and lets you know when there's a match. It doesn't have the plain text value. It's just comparing hashes.
Absolutely. And the browsers do that. If you store your passwords in the browser or enter your passwords in the browser or allow them access to that facility or enable those settings.
Hook that up to your IDM system.
Right.
So when users try and put in a bad password or a compromised one, it won't let them.
Yep. Don't do that.
If their password becomes compromised, it generates an alert so you can do something about it.
Change those first. It's great. Great advice, Lee. Agree.
Yeah, so you get it because you got to go from both sides, right?
Right. And you got to protect even the weaker multiple factors like your email and your SMS. Make sure with your cell phone provider that you're establishing a PIN code that when you go make changes to your account, say, hey, like what's protected? Like ask them. Every time I go to my cell phone provider, I ask them, I'm like, what's protecting my account? Is it up to date? Like, what are you doing if someone tries to impersonate me? Like, what else can I do? They're more than willing to work with you. Like the cell phone providers also are incentivized to make sure that like SIM swapping isn't happening, because if they're not providing a different level, like you might switch kind of thing potentially. And I find an increased state of awareness. They're training their employees. When I go to my cellular provider today, I think there's a much increased sense of awareness of SIM swapping than there was 5 years ago, right? So, and they're willing to work with you. And I also know that certain providers, like you can put notes on your account and say like, look, I'm a high risk of being targeted, for example. And that doesn't mean like you're more important than someone else. Like that could just mean like you've got a 3-letter Twitter account. Like, you just happen to register early.
Or you happen to be part of a domestic dispute. Or
whatever the case is. I don't even care if you lie to them, to be honest with you. Take advantage of whatever extra protections they can put in place. I know I've heard people talk about like, hey, like, I've been the target of SIM swapping, whether that's true or not, to their cell phone provider and been like, you need to put a note in that account that there's extra scrutiny. Like everyone should do that. Like the cell phone providers need to have extra scrutiny. Not that that's going to necessarily save you 100% of the time. Is not what I'm saying, but that's a good thing to put on your provider. Also with your email account, like protect your email accounts more so than a lot of your other accounts, because your email oftentimes, like it or not, it could be that second factor. So like I protect some of my email accounts, most of my email accounts. Sometimes I forget about email accounts I had, and those aren't important, right? But like especially your primary email accounts, you got to protect those with as much like good, separate, unique, long, strong passwords like Jeff can come up with off the top of his head and remember it for the next 10 years, which is an amazing feat and awesome, Jeff, that you can do that, but also put good second factor on those accounts and get rid of the weaker second factor for your email.
All right. So Jeff got his go. I'm going to get mine, and maybe we should move on because speaking of cleaning up, you talked about cleaning up some email accounts. If you're going to look for this dump, you probably want to clean up some hard drive space.
Yep.
Because
how many gigs?
Folks are even having a hard time finding places to share this stuff because compressed is 38 gigabytes.
Nice.
Yeah, baby.
Compressed. And like places like Mega and Dropbox have significantly smaller file size for sharing.
Now we're talking torrents and then...
Or, hey, can you set up an FTP server and I'll... I think I almost made Lee choke there.
Yep.
So Lee was listening to some of my conversations I had today. Hey, I'll set up an FTP server and you can totally FTP it to my... Wait, I got to clear out some space on that drive, let alone unzip it.
Can I send through that IRC channel?
Exactly. Just post it to Slack. It'll be fine.
I just want to point out that an article I read, which is really, it's interesting because we've interviewed some of the Lumen luminaries.
But before you move on,
Yeah.
Paul, I had a closing thought. I was letting Mary go. I've done a little bit of research on the origins of multi-factor authentication. I think I've mentioned that before. The idea of something you have, something you know, something you are goes back, at least on paper, just 20 years. But the consensus 20-ish years ago was biometric is the best thing available, but it wasn't really, economically feasible back then. The authentication apps that I use, most of them I think are, require a fingerprint, which I do on my phone. I'm with all what your closing thoughts were, are you good with, going a little bit further and make sure that whatever you're doing involves a biometric?
Yeah, I think biometric is, I think for me, like a nice to have or an add-on that mostly my mobile devices provide for me, right? It's some kind of, it's basically a unique hash that I can use to identify myself to my phone, right? Or to the service, right? So it's a facial scan, it's a fingerprint, things of that nature that I think largely I trust, right? I mean, there's historically maybe some exceptions to that. I think in today's day and age, when they're like, look, you've authenticated with your password, you've authenticated via some other second factor, and then I'm going to like remember that and then go tie that to like a biometric. In today's world, I think that's okay.
So, parting thought, my voice is my passport.
Verify me.
Next story.
Yeah. Well, that could be a whole other thing about voice authentication.
My voice is my passport.
Right.
Verify me.
I do want to make sure that we, it's interesting. We talk about
Your story number.
my story number 11. We talked about Steve Bellevin, Ches, Vint Cerf is quoted in this article. We've interviewed some of the kind of luminaries, the pioneers in our field that in the, basically like in the 80s, they were like, we have this problem. Maybe it was security related, maybe not. Maybe it had a dotted line to security. NTP certainly falls in my mind as a dotted line to security, right? Solved these problems that, 30, 40 years later, we still rely on hey, someone really smart sat down a long time ago and figured out how to solve this problem. And lo and behold, we still rely on that basic definition of and solution that they came up with. And David Mills, rest in peace, 85 years old, is the creator of NTP, Network Time Protocol. And the article says in the 1970s, created that with his involvement in ARPANET, identified the need for synchronized time across computer networks, and his solution allowed computers within tens of milliseconds. NTP now operates on billions of devices worldwide, coordinating time across every continent, and has become the cornerstone of modern digital infrastructure.
And also, he was the inventor of the first, quote, fuzzball router. He created one of the first implementations of FTP and inspired the creation of ping.
Oh, God. It's unbelievable, some of the problems that these early folks solved that we still talk about today, rely on today, that have become standards today that, even FTP, right? Oh, well, it's insecure, but we still use it today and still abides by the specification that was created in the 80s.
Yep. And effectively what fuzzball routers were, what became the modern router. So dude invented the router. Dude helped create FTP and was the inspiration for ping.
What was it? There was a great book called Where Wizards Stay Up Late.
Yes.
Talked about the early, basically, routers that powered the internet. And
ARPANET.
ARPANET.
NSFNet. And
I remember in that book, I can't remember the author.
Zipper.
It was a great book. Listeners should totally read it if you haven't. And they talked about what was the Boston-based company that came out of
BBN, GT Internet,
thank you.
GT
Like,
Internet
previous
Working.
engineers created the
It's the
routers
guy
that
that
power
you
the
were
internet, and they
referring
had
to,
to
one of the
ship
VPN
one, across the country.
Yep, in an airplane.
In an airplane, and they sent an engineer, I forget, one of the BBN engineers at the time, and to like basically babysit one of the first internet router. Dude,
Katie Hafner and Matthew Lyon.
And Katie Hafner, she's had a lot of work.
And Matthew Leon.
Yeah, but Katie has written books about hackers too. If you look up some of the stuff that she's written, and she's authored and co-authored some books about hackers too. She's awesome. I've read some of her other books.
Cyberpunk, which was what got me, one of the things that got me started.
Yes.
Let's see.
We need to bring her on the show. How much do I want to talk with her on the show? That would
the story, the well.
Wendy Nather talks about that.
Yep.
When I interviewed her for Hacker Heroes, which is going to drop this year, she was on the Well mailing list and tells the untold story of the Well from Wendy Nather.
The story of love, death, and real life in the Seminole online community.
Yes. Wendy was on the Well back in the day, dude, and talks about
I remember like wanting to be on the Well back in the early days of the internet when I was reading Wired magazine and but no, that one is a short book.
Was the Freedom IRC, because that's where all the wheel group guys were.
Yeah.
So
and me.
How many of y'all remember the Milnet or ArcNet IMP?
The IMP, yeah.
Do you remember what it stood for? Don't look in Slack.
I don't remember. It's in that book I read. What's it?
Interface Message Processor. But it was basically the demarc between your network and theirs.
Yes. Yep. And that was
all BBN.
Those were highly featured in Katie Hafner's book, Where Wizards Stay Up Late.
Yes, correct.
Yep.
Boy.
I remember I was in Atlanta one time with remember Marcus Ranum?
Yeah.
His ex-wife. She worked for me for a while, and I forget what the conference was we were at, but she ran into somebody she knew, and she introduced me to him, and we chatted for a bit. And when he walked away, she goes, "Do you know what he's famous for?" I said, "No." He said he invented the @ sign that enabled email. So like all this stuff that we take for granted.
Yeah, someone had a problem.
Wait, that was Marcus?
No, Marcus and
ex-wife.
Oh.
Yeah.
And I don't know what Marcus is doing. We've interviewed him a couple times on the show before.
I think Marcus is largely retired and is doing all sorts of metalsmithing and stuff.
Kind of like Jack.
Yeah. He's making swords and stuff.
Yep.
Candle making. Has he moved on from candle making?
No, yeah. I mean, he still does candles. He still has all those little hobbies and that type of stuff. But last I talked with him, I got to spend a week with him in Oregon at a forge, and we built some very fine Japanese cutting implements with some amazing folks, and starting from effectively sand and then.
Really?
Yep.
What?
Hold on.
You started from sand.
Effectively iron sand, yep.
And created a sword.
Yep. We started with sand and carbon, so charcoal. Ground that, and then we smelted that and turned that into tamahagane, which is the smelted steel, Japanese smelted steel. We then took that and then forged that down into billets and split those billets across the folks in our class. And then we turned those billets into wakizashi.
What?
Short.
Yeah,
short.
Katanas?
Like the
not katana, not katanas and long. Wakizashis are short.
Wakizashi's the short one. Okay.
Yep, wakizashi's the short one.
Like when you're inside in Japan and you're a samurai, you want to use your shorter sword because it's shorter, close range combat. Right.
Yep. So we made wakizashis. Now, those wakizashis are not complete. They are fully functional. They do not have furniture. They do not have handles. They do not have suba. They do not have any of the additional things. They're a piece of bare metal that are ready.
You didn't put there's
no handles on it. Yeah, they call that the colloquial term is furniture.
Yeah, sure.
So that was your homework assignment?
Yes, and mine is still sitting on furniture because I have a very specific method in which I want to furniture the metal parts, and that requires some pretty significant undertaking.
Yeah, so I need your help because I got a couple of blades that have lost their furniture. Shorter, like kitchen knife kind of things that my son and I are interested in creating some. So I need some guidance on.
Let me know. I mean, you do woodworking stuff. You can totally do that. Super simple. Like let's set a weekend and come on up, bring them with you, and we'll work through some. Let's do it. Back to security.
Back to security.
Hold on. Lee had a comment in there.
I thought we wanted to cover another one of Jeff's stories, like number 2 or 3. Actually, it's all those data breaches, Jeff. Man, what were you thinking?
There's a lot of data breach. Like Subway had a data breach. I heard about that.
Trello. We heard something about that from some folks in studio.
Yep.
I didn't hear about Loan Depot.
That was the Google search I did. Security breach news.
I don't know about the Subway one though. I heard some rumblings about the Subway one, but I didn't get the inside scoop.
Well, the Subway one was interesting because it's like, oh, Subway, it's got to be PCI, but it was more like business information concerning the contractual agreements with all their different franchises and terms and stuff like that, which is valuable information in a different context, and stuff that doesn't usually proprietary information, business information, stuff we used to talk about 30 years ago when we were trying to convince companies that they should take security seriously, but we don't do that very often. So there's no regulatory requirement that requires it.
Before we end, Paul, I've got 3 minutes for a compare stories. So it's fun stuff.
Some network appliance device thing. So Avanti Connect Secure VPN. You might be like, what is that? The way I understand it is that it was a company called Pulse Secure. I want to say Juniper. Did Juniper acquire Pulse Secure, and then Juniper spun it out to Avanti, and Avanti renamed it Avanti Connect Secure VPN? Correct. Essentially, did I get that right, Lee?
That sounds right.
So essentially, they're VPN appliances, and you're like, well, what is going on? Because I've seen all these news articles about it. Essentially, it's an authentication bypass of their web interface that once you can bypass authentication, you can do command injection. So the command injection requires authentication, but since you can bypass authentication via the first exploit,
it's privilege escalation.
It's privilege escalation. It's
from no privileges to privileges, right?
I know. We had this debate.
I know. Sorry. Move on.
Okay. So that's the Avanti thing, and that was the one thing. Like if you have one of these, but what also I thought was interesting was this is the first time I've seen vulnerabilities disclosed in a product that like has this longer kind of history of acquisition and renaming of the product, which in my mind makes it more difficult to pinpoint it to like which product it is. You know what I'm saying? Like I said, like Pulse Secure was Pulse Secure, then it was Juniper, then it was Avanti. And so you're like, oh, Avanti has the vulnerabilities in it, but that's really Pulse Secure. So like there's almost like a supply chain or a history of vendors kind of changing hands through acquisition, renaming products. And I kind of feel like sometimes the vulnerabilities can get lost or confused. Like, do I have this device? What is this? Like the CPE information basically gets kind of wonky, right, Lee? You want to pipe in here? I can see your. Yeah,
that's one where I think was that one of the ones where they basically said, screw it, the CVSS score is 10.
It could be. And I like that because of the chaining, right?
Right. Because
that's what I would have done with those 9.3 ones earlier. Let's make it a 10.
Yeah.
Well, anything over a 9 is a critical, and I think we're kind of mincing like, oh, do we patch this? Like it's a 9.1, it's not a 9.8. Do we really need to patch it? Like Once it
Right.
reaches
Well-
9 in that equation, like you should patch it.
I'm sitting here going, look, your SSL VPN has a freaking critical vulnerability. What do you mean you're going to worry about whether it's a 9, a 10, or even a 6? You're going to have to fix it.
Just fix it.
Yep.
That was
So
with one of my other
stop
stories.
arguing to buy
Yeah,
it. Let's get her done.
I'm like, just fix it. It was the Bishop Fox had a thing. Which one was that? What was my Bishop Fox story? No, hacking credit cards. No. Was it SonicWall?
Mm-hmm.
It was. I think it was SonicWall, which is my other kind of. Yeah, it was SonicWall, and this is a denial of service. And Bishop Fox proved that, like, absolutely it's a denial of service. And also Bishop Fox figured out, and they were the first ones to figure out, like, there was a CVE issued, then there was another CVE issued, and it's basically the same bug, but the way you access that bug was different, and therefore multiple CVEs got issued. They tied the two together and showed that you could reliably exploit this denial of service bug, and the result was the same, and the access vector was just slightly different, therefore 2 CVEs as opposed to 1. However, my advice on this one is kind of somewhat controversial, perhaps. Like, like you should triage these vulnerabilities, and it's difficult, but you should also look at like the impact of a firmware update, right? So you're looking at this thing, and you're like, oh, SonicWall issued a patch to fix this denial of service vulnerability for this CVE, and it's a DOS. Okay, and there could be a remote code execution. Then there was another CVE, and yeah, it's still a DOS, but there could be a remote code execution. Now, Bishop Fox and others looked at it and said, like, it's still a DOS, but like it's a reliable denial of service exploit, and someday it could turn into remote code execution. My thing is, like, don't get hung up on the CVSS score and whether it's a denial of service, whether it's remote code execution. Get hung up on how easy can I fix this and what's the operational impact. If both of those are kind of low, like it's an easy firmware upgrade and there's low operational impact, and how you measure that, I'll get to that in a second, is low, then just patch it, right? Like don't patch based on, is there an exploit available? Isn't it the KV, known exploitable vulnerabilities? Right. It's true, that's one thing. But factor in, if there's relatively low operational risk of me applying this patch, like, just go apply it, because you never know. In my assessment, 18 years doing the show, looking at thousands and thousands of vulnerabilities and assessing the severity and impact of them, can change at any time. Someone can come along and go, yeah, you know what, that thing that was a denial of service, or that thing that we thought wasn't really exploitable, now it's exploitable.
All of a sudden it is.
My whole thing is, would you rather be in a position of, shit, we have to scramble to patch this thing, or would you rather be in the position of,
we already patched that thing.
I already went through even if that took you a couple of weeks, you know what? I already went through the work of testing it and going through the thing, and yeah, it wasn't the highest priority, but I eventually patched it in 2 to 3 weeks. But then 6 months later, it comes out, they're like, oh, this is really bad and exploitable, and we're updating the CVE. If you're in the position of like, oh, great, I already patched it, cool, right? That's the position you want to be in versus the shit, we have to scramble. That's my point. Jeff, did you want to weigh in on that?
When you were saying, I lost it. When you were saying, is it exploitable? Are you meaning there's a known exploit in the wild, or is there a different level of awareness of the vulnerability?
I think to call it exploitable, there has to be an exploit in the wild. Like, someone has to show that there is an exploit,
or a working exploit,
right?
Whether it's been
in the wild or not.
Right.
Working exploit.
Full disclosure, they can share it with you.
My take on this, Jeff, is if there's a working exploit, you want to already be patched for that before we make the determination that there's a working exploit. Now, there are some that come out, the vulnerability is disclosed with a working exploit, and then it's in the wild, like almost like all at the same time. Obviously, there's no time, right? A lot of these are disclosed as there could be a working exploit. Put yourself in a position where I'm patched against that already. Now, whatever happens, if someone figures it out and tells people or doesn't tell people, whatever the case is, you know what? I'm patched. Because operational risk, pretty low. I'm going to go apply it. Because also, one of the scenarios that I want to bring up is, like, and I've seen this in the wild, and I won't call out the vendor specifically because we haven't done full disclosure. But let's just say you got version 1 and you got version 2 of your software. And in version 1, someone discovered, and so version 1 and version 2 are out there, right? They're out there. In version 1, there's a vulnerability that can be exploited. Now, in version 2, you've removed that functionality. You've removed that software that's vulnerable. But as a vendor, you haven't necessarily communicated that. So when you as the researcher discloses, hey, like there's actually an exploit in this particular subsystem in this software, and yeah, version 2, you've removed that. And so version 2 people aren't affected, but version 1 people are. I'm advocating for, you need to tell your customers, first of all, right? Like, second of all, there probably needs to be a CVE with an associated CPE so that people can discover, like, crap, I'm running version 1, I'm vulnerable, I gotta upgrade to version 2. You gotta put that decision in the hands of your customer. You gotta make the customer aware of the severity and impact of not updating, right? Because you could be like, well, I'm not going to go to version 2. Like, there's just some bug fixes that don't impact me, so therefore I'm not going to go to version 2. But you have to tell your customers that, hey, look, if you're version 1, like, you're actually vulnerable to this thing that can be exploited by attackers, so you really should go to version 2. That's what I'm advocating for.
All right, Paul, I'd love to round us out with two pairs of fun story here.
Let's do it.
One,
I got on my soapbox and now I'm off.
One security, one somewhat security related. My story number 2, another chance to revive your NABAS tag. The NABAS tag was an IoT device released in 2006. NABAS tag is Armenian for hair.
I want to say I knew that.
Yeah.
Being Armenian, I knew that.
So it's a little rabbit thing that has wiggling ears and some lights and a camera and that type of stuff.
Okay, I read this.
The company went out of business in 2014. They released some source code, so forth and so on. The inventors created some updates to be able to revive it. And they've also now just released some additional updates so that you can effectively take the NABAS tag hardware and plug it into a shield with a Raspberry Pi 0W. And revive the thing and take this old IoT device and make it new again.
What do you mean by plug it into a shield?
So your Raspberry Pi has those pins.
Yes. Yeah. Your GPIO pins.
Your GPIO pins, and they're typically populated. You can take a board and you can plug it right on there and have it interface.
It's like a hat.
Just shield a hat, whichever.
I hate the hat term.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's shield a hat, an expansion, whatever. But the ability to take a shield, a hat, an expansion, to plug it into a Raspberry Pi 0W, to use the Pi to be now the modern driver for all of the electronics.
So what's in the Rabbit,
yes, can now be controlled by a Raspberry Pi
via the GPIO pins.
Yes.
Okay, I gotcha.
Yep. So
I'm with you.
Like, now we're going to start seeing these old IoT devices come back to life with modern components. That's kind of scares me, and it's awesome at the same time. But the last one, of course, I didn't link this, and I will share the link. It was an article on Hackaday that I saw this afternoon. And it was the story of Krusty, the Mac SE that could. So the Mac SE was released by Apple between 1987 and 1990. These guys found one on a loading dock at the local scrappers. They had been sitting on the loading dock for 6 months, and they basically acquired them for next to nothing. And they wondered, do they still work? And a little bit of tinkering and some scrubbing and some cleaning, and sure enough, one of them turned on.
Oh, I see that. Wow. It looks like it's been through like World War III.
Yep.
Dude.
And it turned on. So that was in 2001. They turned it on. They removed the hard drive and the floppy drive because they were all seized and rusted and that type of stuff. And then they went and buried it in a 3-foot shallow grave for 6 months and dug it up and left all the mud on it and brought it to a convention, cleaned the insides up a little bit, and it powered on.
Wait, why did they found this old piece of technology?
Yep.
And then they buried it.
And it worked, and then they buried it.
And then they brought it.
They brought it, and they
Did they just really want to challenge themselves?
Yeah,
here?
and they basically cleaned it and brought it back to life. And then they said, well, what's next? So one of the guys involved in the project said, I have a creek on my property. So they went and tossed it in the creek for 8 months. Underwater. And the only reason they brought it out of the creek was because they were expecting some freezes, and they didn't want to damage the CRT with the freezes.
Yeah, because expanding and contracting with
right,
right. Sure.
And they're having some issues with it, but they got it dried up. And in the period before their next con, they used it for some photo opportunities, like sitting on next to their pumpkin on their porch at Halloween, and they used it as a head for snowman. So it was out and about. And then they brought it next to another conference, and they started having some folks sign it, and they couldn't get that one to work because the power supply failed because there were some resistors that had literally rusted off the board.
Oh, I see it next to the pumpkin now.
On the power supply.
It looks scary, actually, next to the pumpkin for some reason.
Yep.
Yeah.
They then brought it to another conference in 2023, September, where they attempt to do the cleaning at the booth, and they forgot all the cleaning solvents. So basically the best thing that they had to clean this thing was Old Bay flavored vodka.
Awesome.
They were able to get a power supply.
I'm just
that
thinking,
they had
like, hold on. I just want to time out. Old Bay flavored vodka in a martini could be a really good thing. That's kind of where I'm going right now.
That sounds really good.
Right?
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, Jeff, you're from Baltimore, right? Like, that sounds good.
Well, no, I'm from Silver Spring.
You live in Baltimore now. You live in
Greater Baltimore
I
area.
live near Baltimore.
You
but
live in
I'm
a place
really
where
lost.
Old Bay is like the thing.
Yep.
It is a thing, yes.
So
And that does sound amazing.
So arguably, after a new sort of broken power supply, because parts had rusted off, after being in a river for 8 months, after being buried for 6 months and being on a loading dock for 6 months, and potentially being released somewhere between 1987 and 1990 with minimal repairs, in September, they turned it, plugged it in, and it worked.
That's amazing.
Like, what? Seriously? And like, literally, this thing looks like it is crusty. Like, there's.
Well, hold on. This is the. It looks like a Mac SE, but what came after the Mac SE? The
Mac Classic.
Yeah, classic
somewhere in there.
Anyway,
but
that's a testament to Mac hardware. Man. I mean, that was Woz still involved at this point?
I think so.
I would kind of venture to guess because Woz is a pretty brilliant engineer, right? Like, I can see him being involved with, like, I could see him today being like, "Oh, sure, you could totally put that in a creek for 8 months and it would still work," kind of thing, right?
Yep. Introductory price at $2,900.
Is that what they're selling it for?
No, introductory price in 1987.
Oh, okay.
Is $2,900.
That's what it sold for.
Yep.
Yeah.
$7,500 roughly today.
Yeah, baby.
Yeah, and that's $10,000 for the hard drive. This makes me want to go check my library because I have a Mac Classic. Mac. I want to say it's either a Mac SE or a Mac Classic in the barn that's been undercover. And the last time I pulled this thing out, we did it as an April Fool's joke for our CEO when I worked at the hospital almost 15 years ago.
God, yeah, it was a long time ago.
April Fool's Day, we removed his computer from the desk and we put this on his desk and it booted up and powered on to desktop.
Whoa.
That's nuts.
Yep. I need to go dig this thing out and plug it in and see what happens. I don't even know if I have a keyboard for it anymore. I think that went the way of the dodo.
Yeah, you do.
But oof.
Nice.
Just fun. Like,
then you can donate it to the Rhode Island Computer Museum.
Maybe.
Dude, no one wants to visit the Rhode Island Computer Museum with me.
I do.
Okay. I have a date. I'm sure there's other people, if you're in Rhode Island or you want to come to Rhode Island, Jeff, Lee, when you guys Who was
Let's
talking
do
about
it.
coming? Who's talking about coming here before?
Josh and I were talking.
Josh,
about
yeah. When you guys come, like, let Larry and I know. And one of the things we need to do is go to the Rhode Island Computer Museum.
I heard
I think they love people like us that want to visit that appreciate the technology.
Yeah,
there.
if I remember correctly, didn't they just get a working PDP-11?
Yeah, they've done some stuff recently. I follow them
Oh, I
on
haven't
social
seen
media.
one of those in
Yeah, dude, they do
years.
some stuff on social media because I follow them, and I'm like, oh, this is right in our backyard. We need to go.
Yes,
it's
we
not
do.
that far from the studio. We need to go visit them.
I hate to say it. You got the mobile recording rigs.
Yeah, seriously.
we can
dude.
just-
I mean, all of us have
it's
phones.
Like,
I mean,
when was the last time we went mobile?
mobile recording
Yeah.
rig. Like that's my phone. Our phones. Like we could totally record some content there.
Yep.
Yeah, Western right now. I just want to say, Huawei came out this week and said they have something better than the Linux kernel. It is their own operating system, a true OS that installs a full stack, self-developed technologies and doesn't rely upon US traditional Linux cores. My take on that, like, it totally doesn't have backdoors, right? Obviously, my concern there when Huawei is touting that, oh, we have our own kernel. It still implements some Linux kernel things, but they have their own kernel. And some other Security Weekly hosts were commenting on this story this week. It was Adrian. I had a little exchange there. It's like, how is that any different or better than the Linux kernel? I'm like, well, Linux kernel development and validation of that development is
all
very
open.
complicated.
It's all open source, and everybody can view the source code.
So
We've
yes.
had this argument before.
Even if it is open source, like the intricacies of who are the kernel maintainers, which are actually 3 people from when I researched in my exchange with Adrian. And I wasn't like, Adrian and we're arguing about it. I was like, it's actually a valid question. Like, yes, there are 3 funded folks from the Linux Foundation that are active kernel. They are the kernel maintainers. They are like the end stopgap kind of measure for the Linux kernel. But there's like a lot of other kernel maintainers.
Major.
Also,
Kernel maintainers.
but also like we've covered research from I forget which university that tried to inject malicious code into Linux kernel, which was then kind of flagged kind of thing.
That was a couple of years ago. That was pandemic time frame.
I've got a pretty high degree of confidence in the integrity of the Linux kernel kind of ecosystem. It's not without faults or whatever, right? But like I've got a pretty high degree of confidence in Linux kernel and some levels of confidence in the Linux ecosystem based on distribution, right? Again, not without faults, not without I want to verify then trust kind of thing, but like I think we're doing a pretty good job. But then you get a Chinese company like Huawei that's like, oh, you should just run our software because we want to be independent of any US based software. Like my shit detector goes off 1,000%. I'm like, so like you're going to build backdoors into that, and how do we? All right, let's just say. So I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt. Like maybe you'll put backdoors, maybe you won't. But my whole thing is, how do I validate that? Right? Like how do I validate the source?
If it's not open, then you can't.
If it's not open, or there's not some facility and or trust model built into here's the software. Now there's ways to validate that, but like I also like the collaboration between like, oh, there's the Linux kernel source code. There's ways that I can validate that because it's open and because it's in consortium. People are there to do the right thing, not backed by any nation state and or corporation. Then you've got the Chinese model with Huawei, where it's like, well, you're both a corporation and part of a nation state.
Yeah, but not all Chinese corporations are like that. And I will say over the last year, be changing industries, that my perspective on Chinese companies has been shaken. And that there are companies in China that are looking to do the right thing, and they are taking active measures to do the right thing, and they are being very transparent and so forth and so on. But you come down to folks that are like,
those companies aren't DJI. So, I mean,
and those companies are also not Huawei.
right.
Because if you look at you go into some companies and like, oh yeah, like you look at their history and they've always been open and they've been trying to be more and more open as time goes on. But then you come into companies like Huawei, when we go back to like DEF CON in the teens, and FX is on stage talking about reverse engineering Huawei firmware, and they freaking ripped off Cisco and put backdoors in it.
Not the only ones either.
Right. And previous actions speak volumes towards your current ones.
I would just
those who do not learn from history are destined to repeat it.
Really,
and that's not the full quote.
Really quick. Also, want to talk about hacking credit cards using mag spoof.
Yep, you talked about this last week briefly.
But I just want to point out, this is a neat trick, but it's also like an 8-year-old neat trick that Sammy put out there 8 years ago.
If you can bury your Mac and put it in the river for 8 months, old stuff still good.
But also, I think that some of the Flipper things are old. Like much of what the Flipper Zero is providing as utilities to users are not new technology, but they're including it in a really neat platform, even if that means extending it via the GPIO pins. It's kind of neat to have that in one platform, but just keep that in mind. I think you and I need to test a little of the mag spoof stuff to get it working, kind of, even though it's old. I think, again, having it in that unified platform is kind of interesting. I also want to get on my soapbox very briefly and just talk about the Flipper Zero content that's out there is largely atrocious. Like the crap I see, I think it was Bill. I wish Bill was on here.
Well, so you shared a story in private Slack, like, this is freaking ridiculous. And
it was like, I have this Flipper Zero with a circuit board and an RF antenna connected to it, and I can change the traffic lights. And Bill was like, dude,
because we talked about MERT last week,
and Bill was like, no, and Bill I think presented at DEF CON on the MERT stuff,
which is not RF,
and he was like, dude, no. So like I ran it by our friend Bill, who is an expert in this area, and he was like, no. And some of the other Flipper Zero shit that I see out there, I'm like, no. I'm like, why? Dude, just the content is
they're waving around their e-peen to try to get street cred, and we can all see through it.
And there's also folks that are just, they have the gear and they're just taking pictures of it and like, oh, look at my gear. And I'm like, but you're not, like, what are you doing with that gear? How are you configuring it? And what are you doing with it? And they don't do that, which is what fueled my post of like, I don't have it here with me, but like, I got an older Proxmark 3, the RDV2,
my favorite,
RDV2, right, which is
my favorite,
that I bought on Amazon for $139. Now, a brand new Proxmark 3
about $350.
Yeah, $350, and then if you get the like Portapack equivalent
battery,
battery and everything, it's more.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, I'm gonna roll a dice, and then like I don't know what I did. Like I bricked it. I bricked it. I messed up the bootloader, and I recovered it, and I took a picture of it and put it on social media. I'm like, look, I held the button down. This is the command I ran, and I got it working. Like I want to promote that, like, when you do something and you solve a problem, put it out there. Don't do the rest of it is like FUD. And there's so much FUD out there of people just taking pictures of their electronics gear and getting all these likes and comments. I mean, like, I
can see exactly how that video happened. It was, you're sitting at a light and you're at the point where you're like, I can see that the light has turned yellow going the other way, and I press the button right now, and the light changes, and I can drive. It was a timing thing.
There's also an ethical and moral responsibility now that I was explaining to someone earlier today that I was like, you know what? They're like, what's the coolest thing you've done with your Flipper? And I'm like, I don't know, like prevent people from doing shenanigans. I'm like, maybe an example, like, customer assistance in retail stores. I'm like, sometimes I don't want to talk about in detail how you do that on the Flipper because people are going to abuse that, right? I'm like, but you can do it. Yeah, it's kind of similar. We're talking about the production staff. Like, yes, you can do it. Yes, we can do it. I'm like, but also everyone can do it. So,
and it might be illegal to do it.
And it might be illegal to do it, but it doesn't stop people from doing it. So, one, us as hackers have to have ethics, morals, and abide by a code and act
We should.
in a moral and ethical manner. 2, you got to realize there's people that are not going to abide by that code, and you need to make sure that you do everything to protect yourself. And maybe that means rather than a wireless keyboard, use a wired one, because there could be someone violating FCC standards, whether on purpose or whether on accident
Standards,
or whatever.
regulations. I'm going to split hairs like
yes.
Jeff might. Regulations.
Regulations, right? So I'm like, if I can do it, if I can go order something on AliExpress, then all I have to do is flip a button, which Bob did, right? Bob ordered something
If Bob
from
could push a button.
AliExpress.
Yep.
It was delivered to Bob, flipped it on, and it
Breaks stuff.
It breaks stuff through jamming. You need to realize that I'm not the only one that can order, or Bob's not the only one that can order something from AliExpress that does that, right? Like, the difference is I'm going to act ethically and morally and do it in a lab environment in a Faraday cage and understand it. Other people might not.
And I'd
But
also argue,
you as the defender, you might want to go, this is critical to my business, I'm going to try to mitigate that risk.
and you say go to AliExpress or whatever and order this thing, which requires a modicum of skill to be able to understand some technology, to know what you're buying, what it can do.
Right.
You could probably also add a teeny bit more of modicum of skill and not need to buy something and everything. And you have everything readily available in your environment for much cheaper and a little bit of tinkering to do that. Do the same.
The mag, what is it called? Sammy Camcar 8 years ago was like, you need to get this tiny platform.
Yeah.
And these other things and solder them together. And then you can get credit card information.
Yep.
Right. Not a lot of nuances in there.
I use this as an example in the SANS wireless class, SEC 617, about doing jamming.
Right.
You want to jam Bluetooth and all this type of stuff. You do not need to be an uber elite hacker to figure this out. You need to have a modicum of skill. And I would say that I could teach my toddlers 2, 3, 4, 5 years old to deny service to 2.4 gigahertz wireless networks, Bluetooth, and so forth.
Where's that card? Do we have one?
We do not.
You know which card. But there was a PCMCIA card, right? You put a debug mode.
An SMC card that you would.
PCMCIA card?
Yeah,
I know, dude. It was the precursor to Express 34, which is a pin for pin replacement for.
Back in the day, you could get one of those cards, Jeff, and you could jam 2.4 gigahertz.
But I could teach a 2-year-old how to do that.
Absolutely.
And that was what I refer to as the fork in the microwave attack.
Yep.
And it's not taking a fork and putting it in the microwave and boop, 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 pressing buttons. Simpler. You open the microwave door, you take the fork and you jam it in the part that tells the microwave the door is closed, and then you go boop, 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 and you run the microwave with the door open. Mm-hmm. I could teach a toddler how to do that.
Yep.
And that will do denial of service, RF jamming based
also
attacks.
Create some kind of health.
Also could kill you.
Yeah,
so don't do that.
Issues, right. Yeah, sure.
Don't do that. Yeah. There's a story somewhere of a McDonald's franchisee that said it was taking too long for them to get their Egg McMuffins and stuff out. Mm-hmm. So the franchisee took the doors off the microwave ovens, defeated the switch, and they'd let it run for like 30 minutes. So all they had to do was do this,
throw stuff
and they're standing in front of the microwave oven as they're running, and like so many of them got cancer and one of them got really sick. And don't.
Well,
you can do this. Don't. Yeah. And at InGuardians, like one of the things that we thought about doing, but we didn't because of safety reasons, is going and getting one of the cyclotrons out of a microwave oven that effectively generate 2.4 gigahertz energy, and then go take this to a really remote location and use the cyclotron to do drone disabling.
I've seen videos where people take the microwaves and do heinous stuff.
Just point that cyclotron at a 2.4 gigahertz controlled drone and watch it drop out of the sky.
Right.
Don't do that. You could seriously hurt yourself.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's possible.
All the stuff comes with warning labels.
Everything should come with a warning label. Including your coffee. Contents might be hot.
Oh, boy. Well, with that, we're going to close out the show. Thanks, everyone, for listening and watching this edition of Ball Security Weekly. Don't hack your microwaves in that way that's unsafe. Larry, take us out.
Over and do that, but don't do that. Out.